You've been taught to stay away from evil, but what if evil was the most useful tool you could ever touch? In this essay, I won't be talking about evil in the language of theology or morality. I'm going to treat it through the lens of game theory, as a strategy, a label, and a weapon that shapes how societies play. We'll explore what makes evil magnetic and why it's useful to both sinners and saints, and how you can use the prestige of evil in your own life, even if you're dedicated to the common good. Because the harder a community attempts to banish something, the more power it gathers in the shadows. 1. Evil as an infinite deterrent. First, it must be understood that evil is not an external force. Evil is a tool. It is a boundary drawn across your world to define the limits of whatever social game you're currently playing. This action is acceptable, these actions are not. Religions of all kinds are masterful at creating mental borders to coerce, cajole, or convince individuals and entire societies to play a particular game. Their main tactic is what game theory calls a dominant strategy. You make obedience the only rational move. The trick is called a infinite threat. Eternal damnation in hell, outer darkness, oblivion, whatever. These are all different skins on the same concept of infinite punishment for a finite crime. In medieval Europe, heresy was more than disagreement. It defied life itself. Whole communities like the Cathars were obliterated because allowing a single heretic to live meant tolerating an infinite threat. Secular systems use the same trick. The Soviet Union called dissidents enemies of the people, individuals who are not merely incorrect, but fundamentally toxic to the future of humanity. Treason, exile, cancellation, each is framed as a crime beyond ordinary measure. Evil is a mental shortcut that prevents individuals from weighing costs or thinking independently. The label does the thinking for you. Obey and live. Defy and be cast out. And if you think this is historical, think harder. In workplaces, when someone is branded as toxic, no one will dare associate with them. Online, people and ideas deemed problematic are not even quote-unquote platformed. The word problematic itself does the job of exile. Every community has its own term for the concept of evil, and every one of us knows how it feels to stay silent rather than step on the wrong side of that invisible line. 2. The inversion. But why then would anyone ever choose to rebel? If infinite threats are effective as a dominant strategy, why would dissidents exist at all? Game theory has an answer to this too, and terms this strange gambit the, quote, payoff inversion. Simply put, players can flip the script of a game so that an infinite threat can also be interpreted as an infinite resource. If a player refuses to accept the fundamental premise of the game their society plays, then the potential punishment is no longer frightening. A player who dares step across a line that repels everyone else acquires exclusive access to dreadful influence. The devil, in this sense, is no longer a coercive tactic to ensure obedience. He becomes a crown, agency, freedom, and power, untouchable to those who stay inside the rules. This is illustrated in legends such as the tale of Faust, the scholar who sells his soul for knowledge. The church framed his choice as damnation, but it thrilled audiences. Faust was bold enough to bargain with hell itself. In history, Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600 for daring to profess that the universe had infinite worlds. To the church, he was a filthy heretic, but to later generations he was a martyr of free thought. And modern politics has those who invert payoff structures as well, such as the case of Russia's Pussy Riot, jailed for their blasphemous performance in a cathedral. The state tried to humiliate them, but instead elevated them to international stardom as icons of resistance. And what about your life? Surely you've encountered someone labeled difficult, crazy, or even toxic, and instead that person doesn't collapse under the weight of exile. They weaponize the label by leaning into it. They say the things no one else will. They do the things everyone else fears, and suddenly the tactic meant to disempower them has placed a blade in their hand. This is the secret power of quote-unquote evil. It is unlikely ground for cultivation, yet it yields rich harvests of prestige to bold farmers. 3. How to manufacture a devil. Since evil is such a dangerous ground ripe for the use of rebels, why do powerful systems continue to use this tool? If the term evil runs the risk of conveying prestige, why do rulers and empires use the word at all? The answer is simple. The greatest fear of any ruler, of any system, is the appearance of weakness, and so authoritarians overplay their hand with predictable reliability. In doing so, however, they mint the very devils they hunt and guarantee an endless supply of foes. The Romans believed they were terrifying Christians when they fed them into the jaws of lions, but their efforts merely forged saints. Saints like Perpetua, a young mother executed in 203 AD, who wrote visions from her prison cell. After her death, her writings could not be contained. Similarly, the Soviet Union attempted to silence Alexander Solzhenitsyn by sending him to the Gulag, but instead his novel, The Gulag Archipelago, issued a devastating blow to the regime's moral credibility. In America, McCarthyism held artists and writers before tribunals, where they were interrogated, blacklisted, and jailed. But the Hollywood 10, who refused to betray their peers, became symbols of resistance to political hysteria and helped end the craze. Repression is a fundamentally incoherent and self-contradictory strategy. It produces the conditions of its own defeat. The more ferocious a system becomes in its attempt to crush dissidents, the more prestige it bestows upon them. So the real question is this: if even lions, gulags, and blacklists can't erase rebellion, what else can societies do? How do they manage the danger of evil without destroying themselves in the process? 4. The rituals of transgression. If repression inevitably backfires, then what's left? If every attempt to annihilate evil only forges more devils, how can any society survive? The answer is that evil must be managed instead of erased. Evil can be tamed with a stage, a mask, and a special time of year. The Romans discovered this trick with the festival of Saturnalia. For 1 week each winter, the world turned on its head. Slaves dined like masters, gambling was legal, and respectability itself could not be invoked. Order returned when the festival ended, but the orchestrated chaos acted as a pressure valve to stabilize the empire for the rest of the year. In medieval Europe, Carnival served the same purpose. Priests were mocked in parody masses, fools wore the crowns of kings, and towns inverted their hierarchies. Even when religious authorities condemned the Feast of Fools in writing, they tolerated it in practice because they understood that it was better to let the devil dance for a single day than to suffer him stalking the streets all year. And in modern times, the same logic is employed in fraternities, military units, and sports teams, just to name a few. Initiatory rituals involve humiliation, taboo breaking, and voluntary discomfort. It binds newcomers to the group. What would be abuse in any other context becomes a signal of loyalty when staged as ritual. Evil, when domesticated, acts as a bonding agent instead of an acid on the fabric of social groups. The lesson is this: successful societies, big or small, don't crush evil, they choreograph it. They cultivate rebellion into theater, sin into spectacle, and humiliation into bonding. The ritualization of transgression contains the prestige of evil, at least for a while. But what happens when the devil refuses his mask? When tame evil breaks free of the garden and overruns the city? What happens when society can no longer cultivate safe, domesticated flowers of evil? That is the situation in which we now find ourselves. 5. A very modern evil. If evil cannot be safely ritualized, it does not evaporate. If a political or religious system refuses to acknowledge that which it condemns, where does all that psychic power flow? The answer is that it spills into politics, art, and everyday life, and there it ferments into something even more formidable, something that can destabilize entire governments, dissolve societies, and decay avenues of power into impotent relics. Take Nelson Mandela. Under apartheid South Africa, he was branded an enemy of the state and a terrorist. Someone so dangerous, he was imprisoned for 27 years. The regime that believed it would erase him transformed him into a symbol, and by the time he walked free, the brand of evil on his head had become a crown of legitimacy, and the system that tried to bury him was well into the process of collapse. The US government declared Edward Snowden a traitor for exposing mass surveillance programs, and he was exiled, hunted, and declared a persona non grata. Yet the punishments didn't silence him. They glorified him, and now his name carries weight far beyond what any other anonymous contractor could ever hope to achieve. In China, the artist Ai Weiwei was beaten, surveilled, and imprisoned for mocking the state. Officials believed they crushed a dissident, but instead they minted an icon. His work is more valuable than ever and carries more moral weight precisely because it was spawned from an environment of persecution. This is what happens when the prestige of evil is no longer managed by ritual. It leaks into politics, art, and into culture. Dissidents command attention, radiate charisma, and even gain legitimacy, not in spite of their exile, but because of it. And what about you? You don't live in a gulag or face lions, so where does evil touch your own life? 6. The mirror. You might not face gulags, blacklists, or lions in an arena, but you still live in the shadow of power. And wherever power draws its lines, it casts a shadow called evil by those in charge. That darkness is never empty, but is instead filled with possibilities and paths that the official game tells you should not, that cannot, be walked. If you see evil only in moral terms, those paths remain sealed because they appear to you as sheer cliffs. Step over the edge and you fall forever. You suffer infinite punishment. But if you shift to a game theory lens, the picture snaps into a different kind of focus. The cliffs are actually walls of a larger maze, and every maze can be navigated, penetrated, and its walls can be flipped into doorways. That doesn't mean every forbidden move is the right one, or just, or worth the cost. Some lines protect us for good reason. But by seeing evil as a function of payoffs rather than as a metaphysical curse, we are allowed to access the personal agency formerly denied to us. Suddenly we can ask, is this line keeping me safe, or is it keeping me small? Am I obeying because it serves me, or because it's a threat designed to frighten me? To think of evil in this way is dangerous. To people who allow the term to do the cognitive work for them, the prospect of engaging with evil with eyes open wide is frightening and wrong. So here's where you should ask yourself a crucial question. Do you value feeling safe and comfortable? Or do you want an expanded repertoire of possibilities? Do you want to heed boundaries or negotiate with them? Do you want to play the game society has assigned you, or do you want to master it? This is what game theory can do for you.